Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We've had a couple kind of, I wouldn't say they're dispiriting episodes of the podcast. I actually thought, I'm trying to think if it was our last episode. I think it was the last episode. I actually thought that was one of the best episodes we had done in a while, just in terms of the sort of, conceptual coherence. And I think Kate and I both had a strong sense of what we were in that episode to talk about it, and we talked about it and so forth. They've also been kind of bleak episodes. And today, the sort of the overall, political forecast is, I'm not sure it's bleak, but it is still, we're still down there at, Drake's Passage at the southern tip of South America, and the boats like flying around and flipping circles, and the 100-foot tall waves and all that kind of stuff. That's where we are, and that's where we're going to be for a long time. But today we've got, we had these elections last night that were pretty favorable for the Democrats. I was a little concerned that with those races down, obviously the Democrats lost those two special elections down in Florida. And I was a little concerned that there had been so much press attention. There had been a couple polls that showed, I'm not sure I have the pronunciation right, Josh Weil, kind of in shooting distance for that race to replace Michael Waltz in Florida's 6th district, that people might think if Democrats didn't actually win the races that it was a flop, that they had come up short. But I think that's not really how it's being interpreted. I think that most observers, the political news media by and large, is catching the real story there, which is that these were basically 15 plus swings in favor of the Democrats, and that's a big deal. I'm not certain of this, but certainly my perception of it was that uh, the Democratic candidate in the 1st district, which is Matt Gaetz's district, maybe came a bit closer because Republicans didn't find out about that one in time. They had a week, 10 days to know that the race in the 6th district was tight, that that something was happening there, and they clearly pulled out all the stops, did all the things you do to get your voters to the polls, and they won. But still, those were big swings, and both of those are districts that, if Democrats were winning districts like the Florida 6th district in the next midterm, you'd be looking at Democrats having like probably 300 member caucus in the House. That is how red those districts are. And of course, you had the race in Wisconsin, which very different state, always very close. It's true that the Protasewicz, she won that by a pretty handy margin, but Elon Musk went all in there, and they got walloped, just walloped. So we're going to talk about that. We're gonna talk about it, and we're gonna dig into the mix of winning and Schadenfreude and all that kind of stuff. We're even going to spread the Schadenfreude around a little bit. Get someone on Elise Stefanik in upstate New York and a lot other stuff. One thing, our membership drive is done now. It ended Monday night. We not only hit our goal of signing up 2,500 new members, we ended up signing up about 3,100 new members, and that is just huge, huge, huge. I don't remember the exact number last year in our drive, but our goal was 1,000 people, and we had to work to get to that goal. So this is way more than that, and I just wanted to, on behalf of all of us at TPM, to thank you for that. To new members, to existing members, just to everybody in the TPM community, because that's a huge thing for us. And beyond it being a huge thing for us in the mechanic sense of, the sort of the hard sense of revenue and business model, it makes us feel good, because everybody in our team is working really hard, putting in long hours, and it tells us that we are connecting and that we have a community that really appreciates what we do. So that's fantastic. And I just wanted to thank everybody before we get into the news. So with that said, Kate, what was your response to everything last night?
So I think Kyle Kondik put it the way I was feeling, which was, electorally, this feels a lot like 2017. And I think it did. You have this sense of first big opportunity for people to kind of respond to the election, some of the newfound political dynamics at play, like, Democrats kind of becoming the party of special elections and off year elections. But then you had these additional kind of sprinkling atop of this dynamic in Wisconsin that Elon Musk cashed in. Like, when wore a cheesehead, right, is handing out millions of dollars to presumably Republican voters, is describing the race in apocalyptic terms, right? The future of humanity hinges on this race. And they got walloped. And I think it's important, of course, for just Democratic motivation, getting people out of this feeling of, well, Republicans are going to win every election from here on out kind of thing. But also, I think it was really important for Republicans to see that Musk has a toxicity, that it's an increasing toxicity, and that there are political costs associated with bear hugging him, which is critical because if there weren't, what in the world is going to stop them from just dispatching him to buy every election from here on out? I mean, the presidency only cost him what, 300 million? He could do this forever. So
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
I think on all those levels, it's really important, on top of the substantive stuff of, if Wisconsin lost its liberal majorities, there would probably be no abortion rights there. We would probably go back to the kind of Republican gerrymanders that left the state in the vice like grip of a Republican supermajority, despite the fact that it's the closest thing to a tie we kind of have in this country. And also, presidential wise, I don't think anyone's under any delusions that Republicans from here on out, when they lose presidential elections, are going to be like, bummer, take it on the chin. We tried, right? So we're probably going to be in this land of like post election and mid election litigation for a while. So it's really important to have one of the most important swing states not have this, kind of corrupt far right court that will reverse engineer any decision it can to kind of hand the election to the Republican nominee.
There was, and I'll give him credit for this, that, Brad Schimmel in his, concession speech last night. And look, it's when you win by 10 points, or when you lose by 10 points, your cheating options even are limited. But he went up there and, he kind of said, some equivalent of, oh, I talked to Judge Crawford and all this kind of stuff. And the people there were saying, and look, it in every era, not just our degraded, degenerate era, you've people are excited and they're disappointed, and it is just natural for people in the crowd to say, no, don't give our boo and all this kind of stuff. And he went up there and said, look, we lost and we got to accept that. And we're going to fight another day. And that is a truly American attitude. And I give, uh, it is a low bar for any politician to meet, but people don't meet any bars these days. So that's great that he did that. And it was striking to me. I was looking on, I think I don't know, it was maybe, it was on Twitter that someone had, was in response to him, it was someone had, put up that video of him basically conceding the race. And I was looking at the replies on Twitter, and it was filled of like, quitter, rhino. that is that we have had this kind of category revision of a not, I'm not even sure how to describe it, that what we saw, if you remember, obviously in the normal universe, Trump, it was a close race, but he won clearly enough where it was clear he won, right? This wasn't like, 10 votes in one state or something like that. But before then, before we knew that, you had Chris Latsvita saying, election day, that's just one step in the process. It's not really done until, what is it, December 4th, December 4th. Or actually, no, he didn't say that. He said January 6th. It's not really done until it gets whatever. And I remember, I mean, as I just said, obviously didn't turn out that way. We knew what the outcome of the election had been on election night, but that's where they are. The people voting that's just, that's kind of the equivalent of what we used to call the money primary. Okay, you raised a lot of money, you outraised me, but that doesn't mean it's over. Like, yeah, okay, we had everybody vote, but that's not the end of the story. It's a setback. We need to not see elections as setbacks. That is the verdict. You win or you lose, and it's over. It's over till the next election, right? That's how democratic life runs. And I guess Brad's kind of a rhino now. He
There
he
was
didn't,
there are also
not the final verdict.
there are also some interesting pieces in the Wisconsin race in particular that will, I think, take some time to pick apart. But one thing we know is that turnout was quite high. Um, and that is kind of fascinating because I think a workable, believable thesis could be Trump has activated these voters who were not part of the electorate before and who haven't
Yep.
shown a huge amount of propensity to be part of it when he's not on the ballot, right? And that would
Hmm.
lead you to a conclusion of, okay, then midterms have kind of midterm special elections, off-term elections have kind of sunk back down to levels of low turnout, only the diehards come. And that dynamic that used to favor Republicans now favors Democrats because Democrats have kind of become the, civic responsibility party that likes to vote and all that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But that's not exactly what happened last night. We had
Right.
some Republicans in the state saying they needed to get 60 or 65% of Trump's vote share from the presidential, and that would probably be enough to win. They did get that amount, but Democrats got something in the 70s of what Kamala got and also just hit turnout out of the park, like really, really
Yep.
showed up in droves.
Yep.
And, again, you can sketch a hypothesis here that's connected to what I said before, first chance to kind of repudiate Trump and make a statement after everything that's happened in these first, few months of the term. But it's an interesting dynamic trying to extrapolate it into bigger elections, that it's not just that Democrats win low turnout elections and lose high ones. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, there was also, I haven't had a chance to kind of do that second day digging into the vote. But there was some stuff last night in the partisan turn of some of these bellwether counties in Wisconsin, and obviously uh, uh, turnout to a turnout could do anything, right? Turnout can, if it's the right people turning out, can turn the reddest county into a blue county. We saw something like that actually in Florida's first district last night, although it wasn't just turnout; was a critical thing. But you did see, and I'll say this tentatively for now, you did see some indications that there was a significant persuasion component to this too, of i.e., Republican voters, Republican aligned independents switching and voting for the liberal candidate. Presumably some mix of anti-Musk, changing their minds on Trump. So it is all of those. Um, it is all of those things, and these, in some ways, the fact that you have these state Supreme Court elections that have a 10-point spread, that is still kind of an outlier in how things work in Wisconsin. I mean, these are, I think we know at this point that you can't extrapolate out into a presidential year, not even exactly a midterm election. But I think that people made their voice pretty clear. As you said at the beginning, Kate, the analogy to 2017 is I think the most accurate and the most uh, telling analogy, especially because so much, maybe not in the last couple weeks, but in the first weeks of the administration, there had been this sense of like, well, he's popular now. He wasn't popular the first time, but he's popular now, and they've built this coalition, and all these different kinds of things. Uh, and what we see now is no, it's pretty much exactly like it was in 2017, and that didn't mean that that did not mean that Trump was driven from office 3 months later. We know that Trump lost the presidential election and won one 4 years later. But the climate in early 2017 was not great for the Republicans. And to me, and this is kind of I think the big difference, and one of my big takeaways, certainly from something that happened in 2024, is that so many people, so many Democrats were saying in 2024, we already saw what this guy does. This isn't kind of like, oh, let's give it a try. We know what he's like. He's nuts, all that stuff. But the truth is, and I think that this is something that, Democrats did not absorb enough. And I was sort of through 2024 wondering about this, but probably didn't absorb it as enough myself, which is that if you were not a political person until COVID, you could say, just turn off the news, not watch all the crazy things, turn off the news, unplug from that. And was your life affected by the craziness? Well, if you were an undocumented immigrant, yeah, probably so. And certain people's lives, but for the vast majority of people, you could just turn off the, uh, uh, you know, turn, unplug from the news, and things seem fine. Yeah, he's doing this kind of crazy stuff that political people are all worked up about. And if you listen to the things he says, yes, it's pretty whacked. But if you're unplugged from the news, which by definition, the vast, overwhelmingly up for grabs voters are, economy was good, things were normal, whatever. And that's different this time. Things he is doing are having an immediate and big impact on people. Now, Maybe people are going to say they like it. That's not what it seems like. But I think we can be certain that you're not going to miss that the tariff thing is happening, right? You're not going to miss that. You're certainly not going to miss that certain federal resources are much less available. You know, your parents, you, your grandparents, whoever it is in your life cycle, they're worrying about getting their social security checks, all these kind of things. So I think it's 2017 plus.
I also, before we move on, just want to put out there that like the most brain numbing circular argument Democrats have been having since 24 is, should we focus on Trump? That didn't work. The kind of rallying around an antagonist thing wasn't enough. People aren't scared of him. We should do kitchen table stuff. It should be about egg prices. It should be about healthcare, that kind of thing. That's not what they did in Wisconsin. And, mind you, a Supreme Court seat is a little bit different than kind of a run of the mill politician, but they took Musk's kind of implicating himself in the race, his like making himself the race's main character, kind of far beyond the Republican candidate, and ran with it. The ad campaign was the people versus Elon Musk. It was all about this billionaire who thinks he can buy elections and can buy court seats and can rifle around in the
Countries.
government and take your stuff and shut
Yeah.
parts of it down that he doesn't like, right? And we are still waiting to kind of see, I think, what'll be a critical question, which is to what degree are the brands of Musk and Trump inexplicably intertwined now? And I think we'll have some greater clarity on that now, because in the past few days, the the kind of beltway press that Trump people leak to are starting to talk about, well, Musk is going to step back now, right? I mean, they're even doing this kind of ludicrous, well, special government employees only get to serve 130 days. And it's like, oh, yeah, you guys, that's a rule. You guys are really gotta follow, must follow that one, right? Um, so that's still an open question. But the Wisconsin Democrats did not shy away from the political fight in favor of the more like anodyne kind of, we know life is too expensive and whatever. No, they put a face on it. They said he's the one who's messing everything up and we're going right at him. And I don't know that we'll ever know for sure what this election would have looked like if Musk didn't participate, or if he spent the money but didn't like insist on making himself its main character. But that tactic didn't work.
Yeah, there's no question. And one thing we all have to learn, and usually do learn at some point, is that sometimes when the political leaders, the elected officials, so on and so forth, um, sometimes they don't land on the right message, but the voters have their own angle, right? Sometimes they'll say like, "Well, I don't really even care what you're saying. I need to strike a blow against this person that I don't like," and that's always something to remember on both sides of the equation. Kind of when your elected leaders can't get their act together, it's always important to remember, like, well, elected officials don't actually run politics. It's more kind of like sailing, right? And it's the sort of the popular will that is the wind and the currents and all that kind of stuff. But clearly, they in Wisconsin, they hoisted their sail to the wind, and they picked up that, they picked up that gust. They did well. But it also shows, with did Chuck Schumer dropping the ball lead to everybody saying, "Oh, they're feckless"? Well, no. I mean, yes, the people thought that, but then they thought, well, but I'm still going to show up and like crush Elon, or So, um, uh, I do think that this is a big question. Whether it wouldn't surprise me if we're going to hear something in the next week where Musk says, "Oh, I'm Doge is off to a great start. I'm going to go back to my businesses and whatever. But he's still going to be, I mean, he's still going to be running it because it's all made up of his people. A, um, the reason it has had the force that it has is that he is behind it. And I mean, and when I say force, um, people don't show up with like private security guards and try to break into a building on their own. You do that when you got a billionaire behind you who's there's a and even that's one part of it. That has also been a big part of what has kept members of Congress keeping their mouth shut. He's still going to be doing it. He's still going to be mouthing off on Twitter. He's still going to be jumping into races because he can't help himself. And we're still going to have this thing about the National Guard needs to deploy to maintain Twitter's market capitalization. um and so a, it's not going to happen, and people can't let it happen.
I also think it's just engaging in this kind of like liberals always lose ideology to think, when Musk is there, he's being destructive in a way that we know Trump wouldn't have the energy or attention span for. He has been kind of singularly effective in the kind of raising of the federal government. But then also, if he steps back, well, that's bad too, right? Because then the albatross is gone from Trump's neck, and this big kind of subject of all these attacks is gone. So that's just, I read a Politico column today that was basically the thesis, right? You can't, either is bad. So I think
Yeah, yeah,
instead of kind of engaging in loser think, you have to see the reality for what it is, which no, he doesn't have to leave to spend more time with his companies, right? That's the equivalent of the male politician saying, I have to step back and spend more time with my family just before you find out they're like having an affair with the intern or something, right? It's just,
right.
I think it's reflective of the fact that he is toxic and that the rewards they feel that they reaped are coming to an end. And he has no savvy to know that perhaps he shouldn't be kind of cashing in all of his political capital every time, right? I mean, take the Wisconsin race as an example. Someone who was a little more politically savvy maybe would have a finger to the wind and be like, Democrats are probably favored here, probably have been favored for a while. Maybe any person on the right who's got some baggage, who's polling pretty dismally, should not step into the ring on this one, or should maybe try to pull the strings in a much quieter way. Because he's like, the id of this like little damaged child running around, can't process that, right? He's like, no, 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 I'm big special boy. Big special race has to be about the big special boy. So
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
is about vulnerability for them. This is not about 40 chess. Democrats always lose. Trump is the ultimate. Come on. No, that's not what this is about. He is starting to drag them down. They're recognizing it.
Yep, yep. No, and it very good point you make, that anybody, look, there are clearly things that Elon Musk is good at. He would not have multiple companies. Yes, he didn't found them. Yes, he bought them, but these are multiple companies that he has done well with. So it is not like the guy doesn't have any talents. Self-awareness and restraint, I think everybody would agree, are not among his high talents. And to your point, you know, it no one involved in politics would think, even on a very Trump optimist point of view, like, yeah, Democrats, they're kind of like totally on their back and they're going to have this, Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. And yeah, Republicans are totally going to win that. Well, no, no, they're not. I mean, possible, but odds aren't great. So, yes, a savvier person would say, like, I'll give some money. I'm not going to be like running to Wisconsin constantly and all this kind of stuff. But, this is on to, um, it's really critical for, it's easy in a moment like this to think we need to try to claw back a few positions at the CDC. We need to try to save this thing at the VA. And all those things are absolutely critical. But you need to be thinking like, no, we are going to, first of all, dig into all the behavior that happened. And I guarantee you, a lot of criminal laws were broken. And we're going to find out. And is that going to happen next week? No. But to be saying, where are we sailing the ship to? We're sailing the ship to, we are going to find out what happened. We are going to have accountability for what happened, and we are going to rebuild something better. Now, what is the timeline for that? I don't know exactly, but you need to be thinking in those terms. And so um, this is an example of they are not all powerful. This is, a first blow to be stricken.
And this is, kind of capping probably the most euphoric 24 hours that Democrats have had in many a month. And that was buoyed by Cory Booker's 25-hour plus filibuster on the Senate floor, where he gave the longest filibuster in US history. Um, and he wasn't reading a cookbook or Dr. Seuss, right? It was all one big long performance about, this is not a normal moment, so we can't act normally, right? We kind of have to stand up and say what's going on. And I I mean, it has also spurred some other Democrats to act. Gallego is putting a hold on all veterans related nominations until the VA cuts are reversed. Um, Schiff is doing the same in connection to the crazy kind of DC attorney, this Ed Martin guy who's going crazy. So um, it I thought was kind of an incredible distillation of the political climate that we're in right now, because from a substantive standpoint, it was nothing, right? Like, he wasn't holding up a piece of legislation. This didn't achieve anything. This didn't reverse any of the damage done or kind of deal a death blow to the Trump administration. But I have heard from so many people kind of across not across the political spectrum in terms of Trump people, but across it in terms of kind of lefty left to center left to never Trumper type territory, that people are just ecstatic, buoyed in a way that they haven't been for months, because they feel like someone is doing something, someone is kind of standing up and articulating the unacceptability of what's happening. And it's the perfect thing to do in a time where Democrats don't know how to win in the attention economy, something that Trump is unparalleled in his deftness with, and which the right wing media ecosystem kind of makes so much easier for Republicans to do than Democrats. And what have we been saying on this show for months? Like, try stuff. Some stuff won't work, but you have a lot of runway right now to experiment and see what does have staying power. And that's exactly what Booker did, right? Only 100 people in the whole country can do a Senate filibuster. So he was like, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to break a record of, someone who happens to be this kind of vile segregationist on top of it. So you have the inherent also kind of like win of quote unquote DEI, right? Kind of a civil rights victory
Hmm.
around this
Hmm.
this national level attempt to like bring us back to the 1950s. And it was inspiring, and it was sticky. His staff was live streaming the whole thing, but chunking it up into easily digestible, TikTok sized little bites. It's crazy that we live in a world where this is the headline now, but on TikTok he had something like 300 million views all told. Like, it worked. And I don't think you necessarily would have known before this happened if it would have worked or not. And that's why it's really important, I think, for people to try, like, do weird stuff, right? Not the kind of regular order of business. And when you're in the minority, that inherently is going to involve some creativity and some, frankly, performance art, right? That's not achieving anything substantive, but that is like whipping up your base and best case scenario, breaking through to people who aren't paying much attention.
Yeah, I think, the one point you made there is that you have to do things. And by do with a capital D, not concepts or putting out a press release or this is one part of this is people have to understand kind of how a news economy works, that you do a thing. You're like, oh, we don't see people stand up for 25 hours and free associate, for 25 hours. That's a new thing. You got, that's irresistible to press. And as you said, his own staff kind of did the sort of the blocking and tackling to facilitate that by, I guess, I don't know if they were live streaming it on TikTok as opposed to just kind of putting, as you said, the chunks of it up, but they definitely made it ubiquitous. And there's no question to me that Ruben Gallegos thing and Adam Schiff's thing, yeah, maybe they were thinking about it, but they did it when Booker said this, said he was going to do this thing. And I think it was Jamel Bowie, who's, God, just the smart, just the sharpest, best person out there. He's like, um, I know who I admire by people I get jealous of for things they came up with before I did. But he said, I think on Blue Sky or something, um, you want to harness people's ambition because, like, was part of this for Cory Booker, like, hey, I'm going to grab the stage. I'm a young man. I want to run for president someday. Absolutely. And you want people like that. You want to harness people's ambition, right? If any, you want it to be collaborative, but ideally you want, the all the people in the Senate who see themselves moving on to higher things, like, okay, let's see what you can do, guys, gals, right? Let's have it. Let's show your stuff. Show your stuff. So when we're kind of, choosing a standard bearer in 2028, you'll say like, oh, that Cory Booker, man, he knew when it was time. He took a risk, all that kind of stuff. And another part of this to me is that as as dispiriting as the Chuck Schumer continuing resolution debacle was for Democrats, I think you can also see now it's whatever the inverse of a Pyrrhic victory is, right? It's a defeat that in some ways is having a lot of positive uh, after effects. It's a defeat that in some ways is a victory because one part of that kind of told the story in my mind is that Chuck Schumer did not think he was going to be still going on talk shows 2 weeks later trying to defend his job after he did. I guarantee you that's not how he thought that was going to play out. And it's no question to me that Democrats saw that and kind of coalesced around the idea that not having a strategy is not a strategy, right? Being passive and being reactive is not working. So you're seeing people like Cory Booker come forward now and do these things that are having a catalyzing effect. It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah, in terms of the ambition thing, it's funny because my first thought when we found out this was gonna happen is, like, was kind of uncharitable things about Cory Booker, that I found him to be very performative.
Hmm.
Um, he is not one of the lawmakers that I usually depend on to give, like, substantive answers to questions, He's much more kind of, I wouldn't say he's not a workhorse, but he is a show pony in terms of
Hmm.
the different
lawmakers come to it for different reasons, and he is one who clearly loves the spotlight, right? I mean, he did the
Mhm.
"I am Spartacus" moment, like, I don't think he
Mhm.
is particularly shy about that, and this was a perfect use of those tendencies, right? Like, it takes a special personality to be willing and able to give a 25-hour speech, and cynically, you can call that kind of, peacocking or main character syndrome, but you know what? That's part of being a politician, and the ones who are good
Mhm.
at it should run with it right now,
Yeah.
kind of play to your strengths. Like, I think that's embedded in people's criticism of democratic attempts to even the playing field of social media just being these kind of direct to camera, holding your phone, little like explainers of what's going on. And, to give them some credit, again, I would rather them try things than not, right? But I think that suggests that they think the only model of this is what AOC does, right? That she goes on Instagram live, um, or whatever while she's like getting ready or leaving the hill or something and does those kind of raw, uncut behind the scenes things and people react really well to that. And, it's okay to try and it's also okay to recognize maybe that's not the one format that kind of works for everyone, right? And so that's why another reason I just think the speech is so smart. It's televised the whole time. It's super accessible, right? There is a game element to it of can he survive to 25 hours, what about he has to use the bathroom, he hasn't eaten, you have the kind of like West Wingian part of it where the other senators are kind of taking shifts to come onto the floor and ask him a question so he
And be
can like take a
friends.
break
Yeah,
from
yeah.
talking and that whole kind of like we are buds in this quest to save democracy thing. I mean, it well, I really think it was a masterstroke, and I think really important in terms of, like, getting into the bloodstream for Democrats a success, and a success that stems from somewhere kind of creative and novel and that plays to the strength of that particular politician because I've said it a million times, I'll just say it again, it's trial and error. You don't know what's going to break through until something breaks through. This was a success. Will everything that follows be a success? No. But what the people are clearly clamoring for are attempts, just try to do something, try to harness what I think for most of these people is a genuine anger or fear or upset and see if your talents that have gotten you elected, can kind of coalesce with that to make some kind of moment that has traction.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And there, not everything has to be a success. As you say, you try a number of things, and this is one of the reasons why I've never been as persuaded um, as a lot of people that uh, the American right has sort of locked in the new media ecosystem, that we're just on a kind of a totally unlevel playing field. And it's almost the equivalent of like if you're in an autocratic country and there's the sort of the state TV station and you can't get on the station, and that's kind of how it is now. It is absolutely true that it for many years, for many decades at this point, you had Fox and all these things, but the right has created this new thing, largely with podcasts, but in sort of other new media things that also is reinforced by Fox, and that is a thing for them. But you start doing things that get people's attention, and you can it's not static, right? These in just the way that it wasn't static when the right was building up their things. You have to, and you certainly can't just sit back and say, well, the media ecosystem is tilted against us, what are we going to do? You've got to go out there and get attention. And I think this was also an example of a proof of concept, you can break through, notwithstanding all of that, all of that, all of that stuff. And look, there was back in the '90s, in opposition to Bill Clinton, the right built up kind of early new media ecosystem and stuff. So even what has happened is not totally is not totally new. And you have one thing that Democrats have to grab onto, and you alluded to this in are we talking about democracy and Elon? Are we talking about egg prices? And what drives me crazy about this, and I think this is in part what you were saying, is that this is not an either or. We're not upset um, by the stuff happening at NIH because we're like really hardcore about the intricacies of peer review. We're upset about it because everybody gets terrible diseases and everybody has unending family heartbreak because of things that happen to their loved ones. And this is the money we invest to get cures so those things don't happen. So yes, we're really upset about that. That is a big deal. And you don't have to have an advanced degree to be upset about that if if it is explained to you. And it's we're not upset about tariffs because we have these kind of highly theoretical ideas about comparative advantage. It's more like, what the fuck, we're just coming off this inflation thing, and you've got this idiot completely like on like there's no it's not even like there's like a groundswell Republicans like bring on the fucking tariffs. We've been waiting. No one's asking for tariffs. It's just this dude doing it for these kind of because of his weird internal drama. So the reason all of this, we care about this stuff, and certainly the way that you um that you articulate it, is because it fucks with people's lives in just the way that, I mean, I this talking about eggs, and I live in New York City where everything is kind of more expensive, but I hadn't even tried to buy eggs for a while because it was like half the time there were no eggs on the shelf, and then the other times it was just too expensive. So I noticed there's a lot more eggs there, and take a look. It was $12 for a dozen eggs. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? This crazy stuff. So it's these dichotomies are not real, and anybody thinking in terms of them is just not knowing how it works.
So the last thing that we want to talk about is this event that really couldn't have happened to kind of a nicer person, which has a special twist on it now that we have last night's election results in. But I'm talking, of course, of the plummeting fate of Elise Stefanik, previously bound for the UN, so convinced that she was getting the job that she went on this farewell tour around her district. She had already given up her leadership slot. And as our listeners probably know by now, that spot is no more. They officially yanked her nomination out of concerns about the thinness of the Republican House majority. And this was sparked in part by concern about the special elections we saw last night in Florida, because the concern was that if Republicans were getting at all nervous about a plus 30 Trump seat, then suddenly Stefanik's plus 20 Trump seat, well, that doesn't seem like such a safe bet anymore. And if Democrats kind of pick off even one or two of these special elections, I mean, that's ball game in the House, right? And that's not even putting in the kind of gruesome calculus that 3 or 4 members of Congress usually die during a term, and you will have some abrupt retirements for better jobs or scandals or whatever. So, it does make it a little bit funny if you were one of those who was like hoping for the great Democratic upset in these super Trumpy seats, that it makes it kind of funnier that they did win because it made the pulling of her nomination maybe a little bit less critical. But now she is kind of booted back down into the hoi polloi of the House without even a leadership position. And you have Mike Johnson kind of trying to make up some participation trophy role for her. Like, oh no, we're going to have her in leadership somehow. But, the woman who took her spot is not, not going to be like, oh, here you go, Elise. Sorry that happened to you. Right. So I don't know. They're going to make up some kind of assistant to the regional manager job that she can have for her pains.
The best part of that story for me is that it would have taken some of the pleasure from it if she would have been involved in the decision making, like, okay, look, things are tight, we got to make some sacrifices here, we're going to shift the plan. But apparently there was, as Trump often does, a day out when it started leaking out, like, oh, we may have to pull a lease, that apparently she pulled out all the stops, was trying to call Trump, trying to pull in all her things, like, no, don't do it. And so she made a strategic decision to, when a plane with like damaged flight landing gears coming in, you drop you jettison the fuel, right? And she jettisoned all the dignity in the final moments, trying to undo the decision, but it wasn't happening. And Trump said, the big the big thumbs down, or the big "you're fired" or "you're not
Right.
hired," or whatever it is for Elise.
Look, and I mean, I'm of the position that you can be mean to any elected official that you want because they're more powerful than you are, and that's kind of
Yep.
part of the job. But with her in particular, she's someone who everyone says in this grand debate of do these people know better, or are they just like really totally mind wormed into believing it, which practically doesn't usually matter, but on the moral level, can trouble you a little bit with the people that are smart or clear-eyed enough to kind of see what's going on and still have decided to kind of hitch their political wagons to it. And she's absolutely one of the ones in that category. Like you hear Adam Kinzinger in particular talking about her, and it is just utter contempt, because she's someone that he worked kind of closely with and that for a time was in this coterie of Republicans saying, "No, this is insane. We're not going to kind of let him take over our party." And then as soon as she kind of had a finger in the wind and felt that that's not the way it was blowing, just totally and shamelessly flopped over to the other side and decided to kind of remake her into being the ultimate MAGA lieutenant. So it's pretty vindicating to see some like karmic punishment for that degree of self-serving spinelessness.
Yeah, I mean, in the first 2 years of the Trump era, she was one of those, I'm not sure never Trump, but non-Trump, and was sort of pitching herself to the press like, oh, this rising young Republican woman. She's not on the Trump bandwagon. There's a different future for the Republican Party. In the same way that the woman from South Carolina, whose name I'm
Nancy
forgetting at the
Mace.
moment, Nancy Mace, she had like a half day
Yep.
where that was her brand until she went full Trump. So yeah, when someone is this um transactional and hypocritical, and just, it's not even either of those words, it is so utterly without shame. It's God looks on you with favor when you make fun of them. This is I can tell you this, I know God has told me. So it's okay, it's okay.
And
So
it's nice at a time where it feels like all the worst people have won so much to see one of them be slapped down, No,
yeah,
not for you. You don't get the
yeah,
fancy UN apartment. You're back
yep,
to last in line in the house cafeteria. This is what
exactly,
you get
exactly.
for pledging your sword to this guy. This is what happens. You
Mhm.
should have known better.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, yeah. So this was the Good Vibes episode. Well, maybe we'd be lucky enough to have a few more in the future, but obviously we're still deep in it. And for this episode, I think that's all we got.
All right. See you next week.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.